Well, good evening to you, and or afternoon, or whenever you're seeing this. And I hope that you're doing okay. This is Wednesday morning. If I look a little bleary-eyed, I stayed up till about midnight last night, as many of you did. And we're still waiting. We're still trusting. We're still, no matter what, believing in the absolute power of God. So, don't worry. Don't worry. In fact, that's kind of where we are this morning. I'm in the morning. That's where we are today as we're continuing our look into 1 Peter chapter 3. So get your Bibles there. This is going to be a difficult one. You notice I'm in a different place. I'm in the choir room because I want to use the chalkboard, or the writing board rather. And boy, I'm showing my age, aren't I? But using the writing board behind me to help us get through one of the most difficult to understand passages in the Bible. I'm going to look at three interpretations. I'm going to give you what minds that are smarter than me have said, and what I believe is probably the best interpretation. Let me move out of the way for just a second. In case you're taking notes, I'll read these for you. We'll get to them in just a few minutes, but they'll be helpful to you as we get there. First question is, when did Christ make his proclamation? Now, don't worry about it yet. I'll get to what that proclamation is in a moment. This is just so you can copy this down on your notes. When did Christ make his proclamation? Number two, to whom did Christ make his proclamation? And the third question is, what did Christ proclaim? When, whom, what? All right? So you got that. Now, hold that in your mind just a moment. We'll get to it in a moment. Let's back up a little bit and start off by saying, don't worry. And that's really what Peter is saying at this time to these people who are experiencing the unknown factors in their life. Much, much worse than we are, obviously. Because they were experiencing things that were impacting them physically, culturally, job-wise, family, friends, all manner of things that they were beginning to question their faith. Now, I hope these political things have not brought you to that. I hope we've learned a lot more from Peter's time and centuries ago, and we understand and believe and trust. All right, there we are. Huge word, that we trust in a God who loves us, who's all loving, he's all wise, and he's all powerful. All loving, all wise, all powerful. Therefore, no matter where we are, no matter what experience we are experiencing, I'll get it out here, it does not move us. It does not cause us to be frantic and worry and wring our hands and wonder if we're going to make this through. Because it doesn't matter, really. Essentially, it does not matter, folks, if you and I make it through. It matters that God will see our faith all the way through to the end. It's not about us. It is about God. It is not about your circumstances. It is about a God who has all of the circumstances in his hands. Do you believe that? Do you trust that? See, that is 1 Peter. That is 1 Peter. He's saying, look, guys, don't let the circumstances of your life dictate the actions of your life. We live in difficult times, for sure. Nothing to the extent that Peter was experiencing, I guarantee you, nothing. And yet in our little lives, we tend to think that's even worse, but it's not worse. Not at all. Peter is saying, in the midst of these circumstances, make sure that your life exemplifies Jesus Christ. Make sure that your faith is greater than your surroundings so that you don't answer in a bitter way, in a reproachful way, but instead that you lift up Christ at all times to a watching world who is needing a solid direction that is based upon faith and trust. Church, are we listening? This is hard, guys. We want to answer word for word, action for action. I love what I heard somebody say. I think it was somebody in the religious area. Wasn't an evangelical, but it should have been. Because in our time, we want to punch back when we feel we've been punched. We call that in Old Testament an eye for an eye. And this religious speaker said, in my experience, every time you have an eye for an eye, it only leads to more blindness. Is that a great expression? When you take an eye because your eye has been taken, it only produces more blindness. And that's exactly what Peter's saying. We can't do this. Don't do this. When you're experiencing suffering of all kinds, verse 13, who then will harm you if you are devoted to what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness, you're blessed. Do not fear what they fear or be intimidated, but in your hearts regard Christ as holy, ready at any time to give a defense. Verse 16, yet you do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that when you're accused, those who disparage your good conduct in Christ will be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than doing evil. Gentleness, suffering. This is the message that he's been saying over these past weeks. Now, he moves into verse 18. A major example from the life of Jesus that is trying to get across to us whose we are and how we should exemplify the life of Jesus. And so he gives us the life of Jesus. If suffering is something that should not cause us to lose our trust in God, nor lose the way that we should behave in a watching world, he gives us the supreme example, which is Jesus. All right, let's look at it. And then he's going to get into something that's very difficult to understand, but again, it's talking about the life of Jesus. All right, get that in your head. The reason he's talking about it is because the church is suffering and they're losing hope and they're behaving in ways that are not exemplifying a faith and a trust in Christ. So he goes to the horse's mouth, is what we say. We go straight to the supreme example, and he says, he's connecting what just was said, which is, it's better to suffer for good if it's God's will than for doing evil, because, in the same way, Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, so that he might bring you to God. All right, let me just stop there. major comparison now. He's saying, if you suffer for evil, that's okay. It is better to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. Then he gives us a supreme example, because Jesus suffered for sins once for all. Now, he is saying, I understand you're trying to do the right thing. You're trying to live a righteous life, but it seems that your righteousness is only giving to you bad things. You're receiving unright things for your right life. And you're saying, this isn't right. This isn't fair. This isn't the way I thought it would be. I didn't sign up for doing good things and getting paid bad stuff. It's not right. He's saying, well, look at the life of Jesus. Who is more righteous than Jesus? There ain't nobody. No one is more righteous than Jesus. He's absolutely, completely, 100% right all the time. In his relationship with God, in his relationship with people, in relationship with himself, he was always 100% righteous all the time. And what was the result of that? He was crucified. He's saying, folks, don't just say, well, I did right, and right is not happening to me. This is not good. He's saying, I understand that, because look at the supreme example. Jesus died. Now he said, now look at it. Not only did he die as a righteous man, but he died as a righteous man on your behalf. That he dies the death that sinners should have died. Right? Look at it again. He suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring you to God. He does this. He who knew no sin became sin so that you might become the righteousness of God. 2 Corinthians 5:21. Incredible verse. And that's what Peter's saying here too. Paul said it there. Peter's saying it here. The righteous for the unrighteous, so that he might bring you to God. In fact, he's using a verb here, a word, when he says he might bring you to God. The word is prosagoge. That's the Greek. But it really gives you access. It's the same word that Paul uses. Can I read them to you? Romans 5:2. Through Christ we have gained access. That's where he's saying, bring you to God, Peter says. Same word. Gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand, and we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not a great verse. That's Romans 5:2. Ephesians 2:18. For through him we both have access brought near to the Father by one Spirit. Ephesians 2:18. And then Ephesians 3:12. In him and through him we may approach, gain access, be brought near, approach God with freedom and confidence. You see that Jesus dies, the righteous for the unrighteous, so that his righteousness will become ours through faith because of the cross, so that we stand before God in freedom and confidence, in complete access to before God, because he was treated unrighteously even though he was righteous. So Peter is making a strong case here. He's saying, now look, you are a Christian. That means you're followers of Christ. That means what Jesus experienced, you experience. In the way that he gives back to life, you give back to life. And if Jesus was treated badly, you too will be treated badly. That's a possibility. But he's saying, now make sure you're not treated badly because you're behaving badly, but rather you are suffering bad even though you're good. And that is going to be a testimony to the world. When we are bitter over this election, when we spew out all kinds of hateful things, listen, folks, this is not right. I don't care which side you're on. It doesn't matter two beans to me at this point, looking at 1 Peter. What does matter is the way that we act in a gentle and respectful way. Are you hearing me? I'm getting just a little amped up here. Because we, of all people, should not act bitterly and disrespectfully. This is not the way of Christ, who suffered unjustly, and he did it for us. And when we suffer unjustly, what he's saying is we do it even as an example for others. Don't let your politics dictate your life. Let your Jesus dictate your life. Okay, you got that? Can't be any clearer than that. And that's what he's saying. Now, next phrase. It's important for us. We're going to understand it, but it's going to be important for what happens in the next verse. He, speaking of Jesus, was put to death in the flesh. Obviously, that means he's crucified, right? He is a living, breathing being, and he is God in the flesh. And as God in the flesh, not some kind of apparition, not a Gnostic thought that it really wasn't Jesus, but it's really Jesus. He dies in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. What does that mean? Well, it can only mean one thing. He's made alive in the spirit refers to starts with an R, the resurrection. I heard that. That's right. He's made alive. He is put to death in the flesh, and he is made alive in the spirit. He is resurrected 3 days later. Excuse me. He's made alive. I was just reading this morning in my Bible reading, going through the Gospels now, the end of the Gospels. And each one of them, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, it's my chronological Bible, and so each one of them relates. It's wonderful because in the Gospels, each one of them has an accounting of someone coming to find a dead body at the grave, at the cave. Used to tell my first graders, a cave of a grave. And they come there, and each time, he is not here. He is risen. He is alive. Great passages. It's just so uplifting. And that's what he's saying. Peter's saying he was put to death in the flesh and made alive by the Spirit. Resurrection. Now, why is that important? Because now we get to that hard couple of verses here. You ready? Verse 19. Let's read it. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he also went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison who in the past were disobedient when God patiently waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. What? Go read it again. Starting in the last half of verse 18. He, Jesus, was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, resurrected, in which, in his resurrected body, he also went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, okay, we'll get to that, who in the past were disobedient when God patiently waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. Okay, well, okay. Here's what we got. I got some notes here. I'm going to try to help me along a little bit. The proclamation is some kind of proclamation, we'll get to that in a minute, made by Jesus to some people. It's really strange, right? Hang with me now. Here we go. First question. So the first question, this is going to be a little easier, I hope, to keep us going. So when did Christ make this proclamation? We'll get to the proclamation in just a moment, but he made some kind of proclamation. The first question is, when did he make this proclamation? Now, this is important because there's a lot of confusion and even some, I think, mistaken beliefs here, okay? We'll get to in just a second. So the first question is, when did he make this proclamation? And I see, looking at verse 19, connected to verse 18, he's made alive in the Spirit. I don't think that can mean anything but resurrection. I mean, it logically doesn't make any sense to say otherwise, because it has to be he's died and he's made alive, and he's not alive, physically alive, until 3 days later. Now, here's the problem. There are some people who say that Jesus, in fact, the Apostles' Creed talk about Jesus descending into hell. When did he do that? Well, there are those, and, these are all, again, what I'm saying is this passage is so difficult. I mean, there's not a clear consensus. There's been talk through centuries, different ideas. Some would say that Jesus, while he's on the cross, his spirit, or somewhere after his death, his spirit descends into hell, experiences hell, and this is the time that he makes a proclamation to these people, which we'll talk about them in a moment, during this time, that he experiences hell on our behalf. Now, here's my feeling. We really do not have a lot of strong information about what happened with Jesus in those 3 days in between. Here's what my feeling is. Remember when Jesus is on the cross, he turns to the thief who confessed Jesus. And remember what Jesus said? You shall be with me in paradise. Do you remember when he said that? He said, today, that's right, today you shall be with me in paradise. Now, what does he mean? Well, I mean, just take it for what it says. Today. That means this day you'll be with me in paradise. What is Jesus expecting to do? He's expecting to die. He knows he's going to die. He gives up the Spirit in just a few minutes. What's this guy next to him going to do? He's going to be dead too. He's going to be crucified. He is being crucified. So, he is speaking about a period of time, today. And when you talk about today, what does that mean? That means today. And I believe what Paul says, to be absent in the body is to be present with the Lord. I personally believe that when Jesus dies, his spirit goes to be with God. He's in the presence of the Father. I think that's incredible. I think that the repentant thief is with him just as well. I don't believe that Jesus goes to hell. Now, let me clarify this. I think that the 3 hours, or even longer, but especially those 3 hours, when the world becomes dark, which is the symbol or the reflection of God's judgment, that God pulls himself away from God. My God, why have you abandoned me? And during that time of judgment, judgment falls not on the world, but upon Jesus Christ. Now, if God is absent, which he is, why have you forsaken me? If God is absent, to me, that is the definition of hell. An absence of God is hell. I years ago, I was a teenager, and I remember I thought I knew everything. I was pretty smart. The older I get, the dumber I realize I am. But as a teenager, I pretty much knew everything about the Bible, because I was a smart kid. And there was a big Catholic church across from our Baptist church, and there was a couple of Catholic kids that came over one afternoon, and I happened to be there. And we got into this talk about, theology and stuff. They thought they knew everything too. And so I can't remember, I did or he did. I asked him, well, what do you think hell is? Because there was purgatory, right? One of the beliefs in the Catholic Church. I probably brought it up, and so I said, well, what do you think hell is? And he said this, and I'll never forget it, because I think it's the greatest definition. Heaven is where God is. Hell is where God is not. I thought that was great. That just, you can talk about anything up, down, dimensionally, you can talk, but heaven is where God is. Hell is where God is not. And at those hours on the cross, to an eternal being, God in the flesh, there was an eternal punishment that was placed upon him, the absence of God. And I believe on the cross, Jesus experiences hell. He doesn't need to descend into a place, but I believe on the cross, he experienced the absence of God and the presence of all the demonic, all of the temptation, all the struggle. It was right there. All the punishment was right there. And he experienced hell on our behalf. That's my understanding. So, I do not believe, when we're asking the question, when did Christ make this proclamation? Some say that it was that he descended into hell and he made this proclamation. I don't think so. Another thought is, and Augustine said this. He said, "Man, I'm taking a lot of time here. Stay with me. We're going to try to plug through this." Augustine said, "Well, what is being actually said here is that Jesus is speaking through Noah in the days of Noah, and he's actually talking through the Spirit of Christ, which we know that we talk in the Old Testament how the Spirit infused the prophets. And he's saying that the Spirit of Christ infused Noah, and Noah is actually speaking to the people in his day, literally, historically. Pretty weak. Don't think that's it. So what is the other thing? Well, the other thing is one that I think is correct. And that is that in his resurrected body, somewhere between resurrection and ascension to the Father, Jesus makes this proclamation in his resurrected form. Now, we'll get to why he does this in a minute. Why in the world are you bringing this up, Peter? Well, again, what are we talking about? We're talking about suffering, staying true to God, not being disrespectful and bitter, but gentle and respectful, and just being the kinds of Christ-like followers that exemplify a Christ-like spirit. Why? Well, he's saying that, look, Jesus experienced torture, death, a terrible death that he did not deserve ever. And yet, he proclaimed victory. And he's saying, guys, hang in there, hang in there. You will proclaim victory one day. Now, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but let's move on. Let's move ahead. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, by the way, one other thing. When Jesus proclaims, in verse 19, the proclamation to the spirits, there's a couple of other things here. Well, it's in my second way. Hang on. I'm going to get confused here. I'll confuse myself. I don't want to try to mess up my argument here. All right. So I believe it was the resurrected body somewhere between resurrection and ascension. All right? Resurrected body. All right. Second question. To whom did Christ make his proclamation? All right. This is where it gets a little more, again, it's kind of difficult. Well, again, I've already given you a little bit of idea there. To whom? It says that he went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison. The spirits in prison, who in the past were disobedient when God patiently waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. So there's spirits in prison, the disobedient spirits in prison that were somehow associated with the days of Noah when the ark was being prepared. Okay, this is kind of weird. Again, the Apostles' Creed talks about, the Latin is descensus ad infernos, that Jesus descended into hell. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case. At least not from the crucifixion. So, in fact, the problem is Peter never speaks of descent. He's not descending. There's no mention of hell. There's no mention of Hades, Tartarus, or Sheol. And the place where these dead people are, the place of the dead today, where are they? It's not called a prison anywhere. All right? You remember the best I can give you is the rich man Lazarus. And where does the rich man speak from? In torment. Not a prison. In torment, he lifted up his eyes. So there is something now, a place of punishment, but there's nowhere in the New Testament other than here that talks about dead people being in a prison. And when Christ proclaims, the proclaim is simply making a pronouncement. He's saying, this is the way that it is. It's not evangelizing. The word is charisso. It's not evangelio. It has nothing to do with evangelizing. If it were, and this is one of the dangerous kind of movements, and if you're saying, well, Jesus went and he preached to these people who were disobedient, but now have a second chance. No. No, we don't see that anywhere. That's all. It leads almost to a universalist idea that you're going to get a second chance after eternity, and you can respond to the gospel, and it's going to be wonderful. This is a proclamation. This is simply giving the news, not giving an invitation. But the other thing is, the word spirits is an interesting word. It is never used in a human being, but rather it is used to be about supernatural beings. Supernatural beings. So who in the world are these people? If they're not the people who lived during the days of Noah, the people around there who somehow get a second chance, then who in the world are they? Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. It gets a little tricky because, again, we don't know 100%, but this is what scholars in the last 100 years or so have pretty much come to a conclusion. That who Peter is talking about, now here we go, it gets kind of weird here. He's talking about fallen angels called sons of God that are talked about in Genesis chapter 6. We're going to look at that in a second. If you got your Bibles, you can turn over to Genesis chapter 6. See if I can get there real quick. Let me read it. When mankind began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God. Who are these sons of God? Most people, and I'll try to give you a little reference here, but most people say these are angels who have the ability to choose. We know that. We know the angels have the ability to choose because many of them decided to go with Lucifer, right? And so here are angels who sees creation and they see women and they say, ooh, I could have me a woman. And they do. And as a result, these angels choose to do that, and they're able to have children as well. The sons of daughters saw that the daughters of mankind were beautiful, and they took any they chose as wives for themselves. And the Lord said, my spirit will not remain with mankind forever, because they're corrupt. Their days will be 120 years. And the Nephilim, these are the giants, the Nephilim, Goliath was one of them. The Nephilim were on the earth both in those days and afterward, and when the sons of God came to the daughters of mankind who bore children to them. They were the powerful men of old, the famous men. And just a few verses later, Noah gets the word to build an ark because I'm going to destroy the world. So, what the belief is here is that who Jesus in his resurrected body is speaking to are the spirits of these angels who have been punished in prison. Guess where they're going to wind up? In a lake of fire, right? But here they're in prison for what they have done. And Jesus goes and proclaims to them, you have lost, and God has won. Why is Jesus doing that? Is he just going nanny, nanny, boo, boo? No, no, no. He is making a proclamation that even though you had the power, you had the ability, and your father Satan had the ability to do many great things, he's lost. And I have suffered, but in the end, I have won. And he's using this as an example. You're suffering, stay the course because you will win. In Christ, we are more than conquerors, right? Don't give up. Don't give up the ship. Don't quit the course. Don't drop out. Don't shrink away. Stay there because one day the proclamation will become true. Now, where does Peter get this? Well, I won't go into great detail. I can give you some. But there is a number of course, we got the Old Testament. There are a number of extra biblical books that are written that don't get into the canon of the Old Testament, but they have a lot of influence. A lot of influence. We know they're not historically right, but they have a lot of influence into the culture, the Jewish culture of the day. One of those was 1st and 2nd Enoch. Remember Enoch, back in the Old Testament, walked with God, was translated right in the presence of God. And someone wrote something, and in there, this is what again, it was a popular book, and apparently this is one of those references to the book of Enoch. And it comes up again in Jude, and I think in Revelation. Let me just read a little bit of it. This is from Enoch. These fallen angels were referred to as watchers. God answered and said to me, this is Enoch supposedly, it's not, but speaking, and heard his voice, fear not, Enoch, thou righteous man and scribe of righteousness, approach hither and hear my voice, and go and say to the watchers of heaven, that's the fallen angels, who have sent thee to intercede for them. You should intercede for men, and not men for you. Wherefore have you left the high, holy, eternal heaven, and lain with women, and defiled yourselves with daughters of men, and taken yourselves wives, and done like the children of earth, and begotten giants as your sons? And though you were holy, spiritual, living the eternal life, you defiled yourself with the blood of women, and have begotten children with the blood of flesh, and as the children of men, and have lusted after. Therefore I have given them wives, and so forth. And then he said, and you are going to be punished. And Peter is using this understanding in their culture And we don't know. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's absolutely true. Maybe it's absolutely true. But the spirits are the fallen angels that are imprisoned and waiting complete punishment, eternal punishment. And in Jesus' resurrected form, he goes to them and he says, you thought you were going to win, but I have defeated death and have won forever. And he's saying, that's what I'm talking about. And that leads us to the last question. Well, what did Christ proclaim? That is, we have won. That the angels and authorities and all your powers are in submission to me. That victory is mine and defeat and condemnation is yours. Stay the course. Be gentle, respectful, don't quit, because we will win. Wow, I got to stop there. That's 40 minutes. And we've still got more questions. And it's going to take me a little more time. It's going to talk about what about in it a few, that is 8 people, were saved through the water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but a pledge of the good conscience towards God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven, is set at the right hand of God with angels, authorities, and powers subject to him. The end of that is, look, Jesus is in charge. God is in control. Don't ever forget that. You may feel that your life is out of control, but Jesus has sat down at the right hand of God. Everything is in its place, and God is in total control. Don't quit. Now, I'm going to talk next week about what does this mean about baptism? Does that mean baptism is going to save you? No, I can tell you right now, it's not what he's saying, but I think it's very important. What he says and how he says it is interesting. So I will stop here because I've said enough and I've confused you enough. Let me just sum those 3 things up, all right? Let me just say them. I'll get out of the way. When did Christ make his proclamation? Sometime after the resurrection is the answer. Second question, to whom did he make this proclamation? The answer is angels who are in prison, awaiting final judgment due to their disobedience during the days of Noah. We get that from Genesis chapter 6, but also from Enoch, first Enoch. Last question, what did Christ proclaim? His answer, the answer is his victory as well as the defeat and condemnation of those fallen angels. I think that's probably accurate. I think that is probably as good as an answer. It may not, it's different, but I think it makes sense, okay? I'm going to end there, and we will finish out that and get into the next passage the next week. Thanks for watching. I love you guys. I wish we had time for questions. Text me, call me, email me, stop me Sunday, whatever it is. I'd love to hear from you if you're saying, I don't get this. I'd love to be able to help you again. Okay, talk to you later. Bye-bye.